26 years ago, the Italian drug dealer Rodolfo Massi was arrested and expelled from the Tour de France during the Festina affair. A sad moment for him because he was sitting top 10 in the general classification and was all set to climb on the podium in Paris as winner of the King of the Mountains. But it was also sad for us because our friend of the channel, Bjarne Riis, was left without his official EPO supplier. In 2024, another Italian linked to Danes has been caught at the Italian border transporting growth hormones. The 23-year-old Andrea Piccolo, who has been definitively expelled by his Garmin team in the most hypocritical way possible. From here, we can only encourage him to sing La Traviata in front of the Italian Carabinieri who have arrested him, because, Piccolo, old boy, your cycling career is over, and has been since June the 21st, the day you were caught, after an interesting investigation carried out by your countrymen. Now let's get to know his story, and I guarantee you're going to be shocked when you find out who this nasty dealer is connected to. But first, remember, subscribe to our new Celebs Highlights channel if you want to win a Van Rijssel bike. All those who leave a comment which has something to do with the video, having watched to the end and are subscribed to the channel, will be going in the hat as possible winners of this bike. A bike with which you will become king of the neighborhood. Now, back to the story. Many must be wondering, who is this Andrea Piccolo? This relative unknown has been uncovered as the great drug dealer of world cycling, and yet he's only been in professional cycling for 4 seasons, having shared an under-23 team with another delinquent, the thug Antonio Tiberi. Andrea went to the professionals via Vinokurov's team, where he was able to meet cyclists of all nationalities, from Danes, like Ferrari's client Jakob Fuglsang, to Colombians like Rodrigo Contreras or Harold Tejada, the latter brought to Europe by the legendary Vicente Beldevicedo, director of the doped Kelme of Eufemiano Fuentes, who also brought to Europe doped riders like Atleti de Coco Lopez in recent seasons. However, what seemed a very promising start for the very promising Italian pencheur was cut short in the very first training camp of the season, when the Astana team doctors detected certain health problems, some very strange health problems, and so he didn't even make a debut with the team, a team where Vicente Beldegarcia gave menotropin intravenously to the doped Atleti de Coco Lopez after the appropriate massages, and that was just a few months in the future. However, Astana issued a statement saying that Piccolo had to recover. He had to go for a while without racing. But only days after that tweet, the Italian dealer was already competing in races in his country and enjoying a spectacular end of season, where, defending the colours of the Italian national team, he finished 19th in the Marco Pantani Memorial, won by a certain Sonny Colbrelli, who would suffer an infarction weeks later. Oh, and in the Veneto Classic, won by his teammate at the beginning of the year, and the very promising Italian Sam Battistella. These good results got him a contract for the following season. But something strange happened, because the only team that was ready to sign him was Gazprom Rusvelo. Yes, the mythical Russian team was on its last legs, collecting riders from all over the world to be allowed to participate in World Tour races. And while Piccolo made his debut in the Volta Valenciano with them, Mateusz Wacek, brother of Karol Wacek, with whom the Italian trafficker had shared an under-23 team berth, achieved Gazprom's only final World Tour victory, with a histrionic win in the UAE Tour after a breakaway by Paul Lapera with 3 Gazprom escapees. It was so hilarious when Russia was sanctioned by the UCI and the team had to be disbanded. The press called the situation of these riders dramatic, and that included Piccolo, who was now left without a team again in his 2nd professional season. However, Piccolo was not discouraged. He took advantage of the situation to train in languages, learning Spanish perfectly. And so, with some of his old Colombian and Italian contacts, he was told that Gianni Savio, the mythical discoverer of myths like Cacaito Rodriguez or Egan Bernal, was looking for a rider for the second part of the season. With his newfound mastery of Spanish, Andrea joined directly with the group of Colombians in the team led by the only rider who has personally contacted us in a threatening way, Jonathan Restrepo, a 100% clean rider who has spent part of his career surrounded by dopers and now traffickers. But be that as it may, Piccolo signed on June the 24th for the Androni team. Just 2 days later, in the Italian National Championships, one of the hardest championships historically, he arrived with the leading quartet that also included his former teammate Battistella, but he lost out in the sprint after 4 months without racing. In other words, Andrea Piccolo went from Colombian beaches to almost becoming Italian champion in his first race with the team. Piccolo was with Savio for just a short time, only 2 months, but he finished second in the Giro behind Juan Ayuso in a performance so spectacular that it turned the head and quickly convinced the doped hipster Jonathan Vaughters to sign him for education first. His results with the pink team were not long in coming. Third in the Coppa Agostoni behind Piti Valverde, a brutal 11th place in Il Lombardia, a race where Poggi beat Enric Mas. Oh, and there was second in the Japan Cup after 73 kilometers in the breakaway, a race where his indigenous, tribally recognized teammate Paulus took the final victory. An impressive end of a season for a guy who'd started the year in Russia, went through Italy and Colombia, and finished in the United States. Possibly this is where his travels as a dealer began. Piccolo signing with Education First now made all the sense in the world. A sponsoring company that is a language academy must be delighted to have the friendly polyglot Piccolo as an attraction, one with so many good friends in the peloton. But this kind of signing also was very appealing to Jonathan Vaughters, the most hypocritical doped-up hipster in cycling. This guy, remember, raced doped with Lance Armstrong himself, and then raised the flag of adopting supposedly reformed dopers in his ranks. People like David Miller, or the close friend of Dr. Cecchini, Thomas Dekker, or the Danish, there's always a Dane somewhere, Alex Rasmussen, who, casually enough, shared a berth in the Colloquic team with our beloved Danish Angevin. Now, Vaughters' team has always been full of dopers. In his first epocha, there were doped gringos like Tom Danielson or Christian van der Velde or David Zabriskie. And then his second, more international stage, there were dopers like Andre Cardoso, Christian Corren, or most recent of all, the Mexican Luis Villalobos, who tested positive, attention, for growth hormone. The same hormone that Piccolo happened to be carrying, and which, of course, we are convinced that what does the poor hipster know? If the mutation from pista to climber of the alcoholic Wiggins was the result of pure talent and hard work, if signing Marc Padon after his hilarious show in the Dauphiné was just to show the disciple of the doped Conchar was made of the right stuff, or if the greatest success in the history of this team, winning a Giro d'Italia, was done with a confessed doper, the Canadian rider Hejjedal, what can we expect of him? Let's get back for a bit more of Piccolo's show. In 2023, the little Italian couldn't shine to the same extent. He collected DNSs and DNFs like Marc Padon. Perhaps they were both suffering from the same symptoms. But Piccolo continued to improve, surrounded by Colombians and Danes in the team, even wearing the red leader's jersey in the Vuelta a España after a flying finish. Undoubtedly the greatest success of a sporting career without victories as a professional. Until 2024, when everything began to change brilliantly for our much-admired dealer. He started the season in the land of his dreams, Colombia, where he not only trained at altitude like the White Kenny or Caquitas de Moulin did in their best days, but he also competed in the Tour of Colombia. And he was a great attraction, especially since this race no longer gives the same money or moves the same material as in the brilliant epocha of Tramadolito Quintana, Esteban Chavez or Egan Bernal. Coincidentally, in one of the stages in the Tour of Colombia, he finished second, just behind his former teammate represented by Beldavicedo, Harold Tejada. And he was ahead of the always tender, fresh-faced doper 47-year-old Oscar Sevilla, and his other Colombian teammate in Astana, Rodrigo Contreras, who in turn achieved the greatest triumph of his sporting life at 30 years of age. Piccolo did not go unnoticed, not only because of his good performance on the road, but also because 2 months later he began his relationship with, what shall we call it, model Valentina Gomez. Now, sweet Valentina Gomez is the sister of Nicolas Gomez. He is a Colombian cyclist with whom Piccolo, the Matador Tiberi, or Juan Ayuso were all teammates at the Colpac Balan under-23 squad. This contact has a lot to do with the story because Piccolo was constantly returning to Colombia with the excuse of seeing the sister of his former cycling partner. The Italian kept getting called by Vaughters for races, but every time he dropped out. Mind you, the guy was on Instagram for all the hours of the day with his girlfriend, posting photos and giveaways and travelling back and forth to Colombia. The poor doped-up hipster Vaughters, he didn't know what was going on. He didn't know what he was doing. He thought that maybe he was just seeing his girlfriend. He had no idea that he was trafficking doping substances. And of course, Piccolo trained and trained in Colombia and then returned to competition flying. So much so that he arrived at the Giro d'Italia with more strength than ever. His exhibition on the road to Europa, where he escaped for more than 147 kilometers and was only caught on the final climb by Poggy Unleashed, who wanted to pay homage by imitating the doped coke addict Pantani. Days later, he came close to winning in Rapalano Terme, finishing a more than worthy fourth. Piccolo was euphoric, but he still didn't stop recording viral videos with dear Valentina. This influencer, with over 2 million followers on Instagram and over 6 million on TikTok, also has an account for the very, very, very eager fans, where she promises to blow their mind in exchange for just $9. Ooh. Now, just for the sake of information, I would perhaps urge you to subscribe to this humble cycling channel, because maybe we can blow your mind too. Back to Piccolo's story. Now, in the Giro d'Italia, he meets the most peculiar people. For example, there's his teammate, Michael Valgren, close friend of the Danish anchovy since childhood, and a man who tried, like Piccolo, to win in Lucca, to pay homage to his doctor, a doctor also of more and more Danes, such as the Director of Education First, Matti Breschel. We're talking, of course, about the one and only Don Luigi Cecchini. They didn't make it. Vaughters' boys were trying for a stage win in every possible way. But then, almost at the end of the Giro, the hilarious nephew-in-law of the doped Jan Ullrich, look at the contacts Vaughters has. Well, he won the only high mountain stage that Poggy was willing to give away in the Corsa Rosa. And with the job done, Piccolo gave up again and travelled with the model Valentina to Paris. But what would you do there, Andrea? Not a lot, it seems, and so he decided to accompany her to Colombia, the place where he trained with his almost brother-in-law, Nicolas, and the irregular Fausto Masnada. His partner, Rigoberto Urán, the same man who presented the country to the White Kenyan, or indeed showed Poggy the advantages of the coffee country. We are sure that the Slovenian alien, unlike this trafficker, preferred instead to focus on Colombian dances and musical traditions. Meanwhile, Piccolo uploaded stories on his Instagram of flights to Colombia and reported his every move via social networks, perhaps wanting to get the fans that his plasticized girlfriend had. Unfortunately, the Carabinieri had been following him for some time, and as he was returning to Italy, loaded with growth hormones, coincidentally the country where his former partner Michael Valgren lives, a childhood friend of the Danish anchovy, as we have said, well, Andrea was arrested, with all the drugs in his suitcases. Oh, poor Piccolo. There he was, being a top-level trafficker, getting the substances in Colombia, a country where he knew multiple contacts, and then he brought them to Europe, so that big stars, or even minor players like himself, as he may confess in due course, doped and achieved triumphs in important races, while he, as a good trafficker, got the money from selling them and making friends to continue in the world tour, amassing a bigger fortune. Now, whether Piccolo doped is really the least important thing. The important thing is to whom he was passing those drugs. Who were they for? Because advertising constantly tells us about nutrition, about miracle bras, about ketones that make riders fly, about magic hypoxic chambers, and about training sessions on Strava, practically telegraphed for months to justify the incessant records of power and speed and watts and times in almost every race on the calendar. But drugs are still very present, and with very young cyclists like Piccolo, they seem to have entered into the system. A system to which Vaughters has belonged for over 30 years, and one which he tries to continue to cling to. And so he's kicked the young man who evidently knew everything he was doing, since he commented that even in March, just when he started dating Valentina Gomez, that he was caught with sleeping pills a la Frank van den Broeke, a la Toluk of the Rabobank team. But of course, that wasn't an illegal drug. But with growth hormones, oh dear, he has no choice. But that's okay. Vaughters will find other dopers. That's what he's always done. And he'll continue to sit on his couch, counting the bills and listening to hipster music, while his riders are out there dealing drugs.